Good afternoon. I'm Bill Wittmeyer. I'm the founder of Pulmostics. We're one of the leaders in the emerging diagnostic field of breath analysis. Breath analysis is sort of a paradigm shift in non-invasive diagnostics. By looking at the trace compounds that are present within your alveolar air and their concentrations, you can actually correlate them with certain diseases. We build a low-cost, economical product that is designed for the point-of-care application of this. Breath analysis isn't new. Hippocrates talked about it. If you go into diagnostic manuals, they'll turn around and tell you that if you smell like bread, you may have typhus. If your patient smells of garlic, think about heavy metal poisoning. If you're smelling honey or acetone, you might start thinking of diabetes or alcoholism, and there are other smells that people use. What's happening today, and get started with Linus Pauling, is we're now applying science to it, where we have instrumentation that can reach down and identify the presence of compounds at the parts per billion by volume level, which your nose can do on certain ones, and then you can turn around and now look at that pattern and correlate that with known diseases. The technology that we use is a ultra-high-speed gas chromatography instrument that's been around and developed for about 15 years. The initial application was developing this to detect trace amounts of sarin, VX, lewisite, and some other nasty stuff that nobody wants to have around. It got adopted by the EPA for doing real-time analysis of water pollution. We've got Max Planck Institute uses it for such things as the diurnal respiration of plants. Industrial research environments such as Johnson Wax, Procter & Gamble, Colgate, Palmolive all have a number used in their personal care product areas. And a number of doctors and medical researchers have picked this instrument up and used it for doing very specifically breath analysis and studying the ability to identify cancers, tuberculosis, such things as oxidative stress in the body, even looking and turning around and saying, can we identify whether you can look at immune rejection response and identify that occurring within the breath or not? The answer to this is yes, it can be done, and the results in terms of its sensitivity and specificity are actually fairly good for a screening technology. The need worldwide for cancers is very obvious. In the US, we're starting to see a decline in certain types of cancers. In the rest of the world, it's going through the roof. Breast cancer in the developed countries, we tend to identify that at about 25% are at stage 3 or later. In the developing countries, we're seeing that breast cancer is being identified really at stage 3 or later about 70–75% of the time. That's because there is not really a good screening technology in these countries. We have a very effective mammogram screening technology, except for all you women who would love to get rid of mammograms, but as a screening technology for the disease, it's very effective. In places like Mexico or Indonesia or Colombia or into India, they don't have the imaging infrastructure, and there is a need for that imaging infrastructure. Similarly, if we look at lung cancer, we don't have a screening test for lung cancer. We do PET scans, we do CAT scans, we do x-rays, but they all have very high false positives, which results in us doing a lot of biopsies with very high costs and risks to the patient. Breath analysis, and we'll get into show some studies in here as to what the relates are down there, allows you to actually identify potential patients with breast cancer or lung cancer before you actually even go and do any biopsies. These are some of the studies. I'm not going to get into them because we're rushed for dinner. But I do have 3 that I want to highlight along here. Dr. Phillips, doing some work on one of his many studies in the area of identifying breast cancer. His study had a sensitivity of 80% and a specificity of 82%. Let me reverse those the other way. Then Ji Lu at Sichuan University, her study on breath analysis had a 90% sensitivity, 90% specificity. Then Dr. Lim and Lu at Southern Medical, they did a study using VOCs and came up with a 94% specificity, 76% sensitivity. That study, actually, Philips has just published another study using VOCs for lung cancer, matching the same sensitivity and specificity. The same sort of 76% specificity, or 76 sensitivity and the 94% specificity. So the need is early detection. I think that's pretty obvious. Saves lives, saves money, lowers costs. The question is, where do you use it? We had the people here talking about in the US, nobody wants to pay for screening. All of the people in the US don't want to touch that. It's an expensive process. The reimbursement rates don't work. So our target is really looking at not the developed world, but the developing world, where the governments, which are primarily healthcare, are looking for how do we use our dollars more effectively. And screening for a population that isn't being screened is very important. It allows them to reduce costs, reduce unnecessary biopsies. This is our product. The first model we're coming out, it's a point of care product. What we're really doing is looking at all of this research, talking to clinicians, and how does a clinician want to use this? And they're looking for an instrument that they can use at the bedside that will give diagnostically actionable information within a 5-minute test. That is exactly what it does. We've got patents on the instrument. We've got patents on how you do the breath capture in this particular device. The underlying technology is this high-speed gas chromatography, which will do a sample and provide you with the results within 20 seconds, with a sensitivity down to parts per billion. We can get into a lot more detail on how that's done, taking first and second derivatives of the frequency of the sensor, but we'll talk about the breakout room. The market for screening in developing countries is actually quite large. We do a rough cut estimate that it's about $4 billion for breast cancer and about $2 billion for lung cancers. In a case like Mexico, where we've been working with people intimately and trying to develop the tests and get it going, the screening market is about 23 million. The lung cancer test we estimate to be about 20 million. This is all doing this at about $20 a test. The model is low capex, razor blade model to recurring. One of the groups we're talking about is saying once we have COFI pre-approval in Mexico, they can do 350,000 women in the first year. At about $20, it's about $7 million in revenue with about a 5.5 million gross margin. The application of breath analysis starts at high value, high economic cost social diseases, breast cancer, lung cancer. But the research that's behind this says you can identify things such as gastric cancer, you can do colorectal cancer. There are other diseases, infectious diseases like tuberculosis, that are identifiable through the breath analysis. And there may very well be a lot of others, but we don't have data. We could not tell you today what is a normal characteristic breath of a healthy, pregnant 24-year-old female, or an adolescent male who's 14 years old. We don't know what that breath pattern is. So we have to start looking at diseases and gather diseases where we can get large populations, and then as we have those populations, we can start seeing what else comes out through big data analysis. We have up here 2 companies we're talking to. The second one, ISTE, is essentially the government employee healthcare organization in Mexico. They have 13 million people, members in their organization. They are interested in sponsoring a trial to validate the product and then start to apply it to their customers. The first one is a private organization up there that is one of the few private pay operations in Mexico. And then we're working with UNAM, the Autonomous National University of Mexico, to develop this test for lung cancer in Mexico. CRM in Malaysia, Indonesia. We're getting inquiries from Russia Cancer Center for other trials to work with them on that. But the focus right now is get things going down in Mexico, so we've got a ease of support. And if we're going to do Russia, it's going to be somewhere in June, not in February. The characteristic in Mexico, which is an interesting one, is breast cancer cases have gone up by almost 90% since 1990. In one of the states in Sinaloa, they are finding that 1/3 of all new breast cancer cases are occurring in women under age 30. Normally people that are kept out of the mammogram screening market. So they're looking for technologies that they can bring in to apply in these areas and start to do a much better job of screening. We raised $5 million in, $6 million, get the number right, $6 million in 2016. We've built the platform, we've validated, we've proven it, we've got an economical design. Our process here is to raise additional $5 million. I'll skip by our competition because we'll get into a lot more. There's more than just Alstone. There's about 16 companies in this space right now. And my background is in early startups for about 30 years. Dr. Sun, our chief technologist, has written a couple of books all in trace detection. Bernard Pico is doing business development, has been across a number of fields, but primarily his last deal before joining us was in a medical device field. He's now doing business development for us in Mexico and in Latin America. And we're looking to raise at this point $5 million. The $5 million is going to go fund the clinical trials in Mexico. They're actually fairly economical. It's about $50 a patient. And we need to do about 1,000 patients for Mexico. Ongoing R&D, because the next generation of product in here that we have patents on provides a much more interesting technical approach where we fuse various sensors into the single device. We've got a number of patents that we'll still continue to prosecute globally, and we expect to start generating revenues in 2001, building up to a very sizable amount of revenues in 2025. And with that, I will yield the floor to any questions somebody may have.